Hey folks, so this video is really just going to talk to you about document design and some just APA things really quickly. Less emphasis on the APA, more emphasis on things like document design. So document design is really how you're designing the written portions of your paper to make them more readable, okay? So, and to also enrich people's understanding of things, all right? So this is the sample peer review draft. And one of the things that you're going to notice between this first draft and the second draft is that is a couple of things, but mainly one of the key things that the reader has the author has done to make it more readable for people is, and ignore the purple font obviously, but they've actually included subheaders in their um, in their paper. And the thing that I want you to think about is, what does that do? What does subheaders do in the paper? Well, what it does is it helps the reader be like, oh, these are the main points. These are the claims of the paper. And, and you can see that the subheaders are really just kind of recap what their first claim is, and then they go and, actually write the paper. So they write that section that has sort of, the claim. So here, Terrace develops a narrative conflict for the episode that smacks of gay shame, right? And then they kind of go into, they write a paragraph where they're saying, yeah, let's talk about what Terrace does here, etc. All right. So that's one of the things that I want you to consider doing is, once you are putting the final touches on your paper, consider adding in subheaders, because they basically help your readers sort of follow your argument. The other thing you'll notice too is that because the revised draft has subheaders for the major claims, there's also this kind of like break right here for the conclusion, right? And I think that's not a bad idea to put that in there, because it just kind of helps distinguish, I mean, I guess you could have had a subheader that says closing comments, but I think that this works just as well, right? The other thing that I want you to sort of notice is that the anytime that the author in the second part of the draft is referring to a particular uh, scene, right? Here, emphasizing two boys slow dancing at Grom, you notice that directly across from that is that picture, right? So if there's a picture or a screenshot that's being analyzed, they're introduced in the screenshots exist in the order that they were, that they're analyzed in the film, right? And that they're all kind of put in you know, a sort of specific design flow, right? And you see that happening here as well. Sometimes this is just as good too, right? So you don't have to leave everything right adjusted, but the idea is that if you're doing document design, you should be thinking about how am I creating something that's interesting to read, but also I'm creating an easy to read document. So you kind of see that the student, either right adjusts things, or if two panels are equally important, will sometimes center adjust those, right? But that's something really interesting to sort of think about, is how you're going to include that. And here I think too, it seems like the student wanted to create things that were visually interesting and kind of like left adjusted one instead of right adjusting them. And that's perfectly fine too. The idea is just, as long as you're introducing them in a logical order. And if you compare and contrast the documents, the rough draft and in the previous draft, you're going to notice that the ways that the student has included images has changed. But the idea is, you never want to include a screenshot that you're not analyzing or directly referencing in your paper, right? So if you're analyzing the imagery, it's a good idea to include those screenshots, but don't just include things and then not analyze them, right? The other thing that you'll notice is that the student made sure that the subtitles were on when those screenshots were captured. And I think that that's important too, because it helps the reader sort of understand where they're at, okay? Now, other things. Obviously, in terms of, I know that APA is a tiny bit different, but you know, this is perfectly fine, right? So your name, my name, the class, the date, and then the title. You don't have to bold the title, but if you want to, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to put revised draft here. This is just me marking it, right? You'll also notice that the student has included like a bolded font for their subtitles. It's actually not the same font as it's like a complementary font, but it's not the same font. If you want to do that as well, that's a cool document design thing that you can do. Find a complementary font to be your, headers and subheaders, right? But you see that the student has the sort of class information up here. Obviously, you're going to want a references page, or just add your references in. It's perfectly fine. It doesn't have to be an individual page. If you don't want it to, you can just have references underneath of it. You know how to do references because we practice this in APA, but it's just basically whatever academic and supplementary articles that you are quoting will be included in here, just like this, okay? So these are all the things that the student cites in the paper. Also, the student cites the OWL house. Obviously, the OWL house becomes something that gets added to that paper, okay? Other things that are important. So all right, so obviously you should know at this point in the semester how to do an in-text citation. There is the narrative style of in-text citation, where you're basically mentioning the academic author in the sentence itself. And then there is the parenthetical in-text citation, where you're just kind of like referencing a specific idea of theirs, but you're not mentioning the academic author in the sentence, and that's how you do it here, right? Most you'll see with the students, most of what the student does is parenthetical in-text citations, but this is a narrative one, right? So here, Tobin et al. Is like the sentence. This is a far cry from Tobin et al., right? And then they add the date, 2004, observation that, and then they quote the thing, and at the end they put just the page number. So this is a narrative in-text citation, where the authors of the academic article are like the subject of the sentence, and then this is the parenthetical one, where you're basically referencing specific ideas from academic articles, but you are not making those authors the subjects of your sentences. They're both perfectly fine. The other thing that becomes really, really important, though, is that you might also want to include, and I guess you don't necessarily, okay, the student doesn't do it perfectly, but the key thing that I want you to keep in mind is that anytime you're using a direct quote from the film, you actually need to do parenthetical citations too, right? So this is from the Grom Night episode, Oh, It's Not Important. And then you see a parenthetical citation, Terrace 2020, but then the timestamp for where the dialogue starts. It starts at minute 18 minutes and 29 seconds into the episode, right? So you actually have to timestamp direct quotes. The student does it a lot. You see it here too. Very embarrassing. That happens at the 5 minute and 20 second mark. There are some moments later on where I think the student forgets to add those in, but in general, you want to add timestamps. APA requires that, and this is how you do it, right? So you put the director plus the date, comma, and then whatever the minute and second timestamp are, just like that, okay? So these are, and that's really just an APA thing that I wanted to point out. So if you are going to be quoting a particular piece of dialogue, just try to, all you're going to have to do is skip around and like find the moment where the dialogue starts, pause it, and then make sure you write down the timestamp so that you can fold that into your paper, All right. It's basically a way of it's just like you would do with like citing, quoting a novel, right? Where if you're pulling something from the film, like especially or the novel, you find the page number that quote lives on, or that scene that you're talking about. It's the same thing, but just with timestamps. Okay. So APA requires that. Oh my goodness. So those are really the document design choices that I wanted to talk about. And then also the APA things that I wanted to talk about, just so that you know how to do that. But these are the things that I want us to be thinking about today, okay? All right.